We were celebrating 10 years since tort reform was adopted by the Mississippi legislature, and we're not only celebrating the achievement of accomplishing tort reform, but also what's happened with tort reform, how it has reduced medical malpractice premiums, how it's reduced the number of lawsuits against doctors. We had doctors leaving the state in 2002 and 3 and 4. We had students who graduated from the medical school never thought about practicing law in Mississippi. Lawsuit abuse had caused a health care crisis in our state, and this has solved it. And we'll talk today not only about what got passed, but how it worked, and because it has worked very much. But additionally today, we're going to talk about some of the risks in front of us. That even though we've had 10 great years of achievement, not only in the medical side, but also for businesses. When I was elected governor more than 10 years ago, every small business in Mississippi was one lawsuit away from bankruptcy. Today, we have gotten rid of lawsuit abuse in our state to a large extent. It's not perfect, but we still have risk. We have people who want to get all this overturned, lawyers who argue in court that tort reform is unconstitutional. So today, celebrate, but also prepare for the future. I look around the room at a lot of people that were neck deep in tort reform. People from around the Capitol, but people from around the state. As we'll talk about in a minute, tort reform was passed in Mississippi because of the effort at the grassroots, not because of some big television advertising campaign or some big money campaign, but because of Mississippians in small towns and large, in cities, from the coast to Memphis, from the river to the Alabama line, who realized that lawsuit abuse was something that we could no longer afford or tolerate in Mississippi. A lot of those people are in this room. And so let me just say thank you. That's the first thing that we're doing. Thank you, Neely, for chairing this. Neely was my Senate liaison when we passed tort reform, and she says that's why it passed the Senate 6 times before the House was ever allowed to vote on it. So we did have a great team. We had a good time. But let me just start off by recounting that when I ran for governor in 2003, I thought lawsuit abuse was one of the biggest issues facing our state. I never made a speech that we didn't talk about lawsuit abuse, whether it was to school teachers, whether it was to doctors or business people or college students, because lawsuit abuse was affecting everybody. We had a health care crisis in Mississippi because of lawsuit abuse. I see Dr. Ed Hill sitting here in the second row, who was president of the American Medical Association at the time. I know he remembers vividly 3 years in a row, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce picked Mississippi as the worst state in the country for lawsuit abuse. Somebody asked me why. I said, because we deserve it, is why. Our system was just wildly out of control. You had places like Jefferson County where there were more plaintiffs in mass tort lawsuits pending in Jefferson County than the population of the county. We had become a magnet for all these mass tort suits, and people found out as the lady who was the only pharmacist in Fayette that you can go broke winning lawsuits. She finally had to close her pharmacy even though she was never found wrong. She never paid a penny in damages, but she got included in every case because that's what gave them jurisdiction in Jefferson County. I can remember vividly when they closed the obstetrics ward at Montford Jones Hospital in Kosciuszko. Now, if you live at Kosciuszko and you can't deliver babies there anymore, your choices are pretty ragged. You can go to Greenwood, or you can go to Starkville, or you can go to Jackson. You got about an hour and 15 minutes from when your wife or daughter-in-law realizes that she's about to have a baby. And a lot of bad things can happen in an hour or an hour and a half when you're in the process of having a baby. I thought that was about the worst thing I ever heard of until I saw what happened in the county next to mine. Over in Sharkey County, the hospital there is jointly run by Sharkey and Issaquah counties. 2003, the counties closed the emergency room. They closed the emergency room in Sharkey-Issaquah Hospital because they couldn't afford to pay the medical liability premium. Now, can you imagine to be in a small rural community, and if your kid gets hurt playing football or on a four-wheeler, or if your wife has a car wreck, there's not even an emergency room? You have to go to Vicksburg or Yazoo City or Greenville to get emergency medical care? Mississippians understood there was a health care crisis. How could they not? They saw their doctors quitting practicing medicine or quitting delivering babies. That there was only one neurosurgeon between Memphis and Jackson who would do emergency neurosurgery, willing to pay what it cost to get liability insurance. I was talking to Dr. Gamble a while ago. He was president of the Mississippi Medical Association at this time when St. Paul, one of the biggest writers of medical liability insurance in our state, announced they were canceling all the policies in the state. Every doctor who had insurance through St. Paul, gone. Two other big insurers, including Macam, which is our medical insurance corporation that is set up by, owned by, run by Mississippi doctors, they quit taking new policies. So if you're a young doctor coming out of the medical center, where an enormous percentage of doctors graduating from University of Mississippi Medical Center have always practiced in Mississippi, they couldn't get medical liability insurance when they came out of there. We had a period of time when the medical students there didn't even consider offers or interest in offers from Mississippi doctors because they just weren't going to stay here. Mike, one of the most unusual things that I did as governor is I got a call from the medical center one day, and they said that the graduating seniors want to have you speak at what's called the long coat dinner, which is the night before new doctors graduate from medical school. They have a ceremony where they give them a long white coat like doctors wear. There's some of them around the room today. And I said, wow, doctor, it is really nice of you to invite me to do that. He said, hell, I didn't invite you. The students make the invitation, and it's the first time since I have been involved with the medical center, 30 years, that they invite a politician. It's always been a doctor or a professor or somebody, but I was honored that they realized with the tort reform that Mississippi's legislature had passed, Mississippi was a place that a lot of them would like to practice medicine. And we've seen that happen. There are going to be people talking later today about the results of tort reform. Nowhere is it more obvious in the medical field. When you see how much medical liability premiums skyrocketed before tort reform in a period of very few years, and then how much they fell in the years after tort reform, and in fact are still falling, as you will see today. And one of the reasons is the number of medical liability lawsuits went down dramatically because all of a sudden we had fair rules that doctors got to quote operate under in the courtroom as well as in the operating room. So people recognize we had a medical crisis in our state, healthcare crisis because of lawsuit abuse. But small business people also began to understand every small business in Mississippi was one lawsuit away from bankruptcy. One of my favorite tort reform stories happened late in the session when a legislator that I probably ought not to name got a call from the local car dealer Saturday night. I'm not saying liquor wasn't involved. And the car dealer said to the representative, "Why are you stopping tort reform? Why are you fighting against us for tort reform?" And he said, "Well, the speaker's given me a really important position as chairman of this committee, and I can do a lot to help the county." And the car dealer said, "We didn't elect you to stop tort reform. We elected you to pass tort reform. And you need to get on the stick. As far as the speaker, he didn't elect you. We did. And if you don't do the right thing, we'll get rid of you just like we elected you." Bam, hung up the phone. Upset the legislator so bad, he picked the phone back up and called the car dealer. Said, "Golly, I can't believe you called me and talked to me like that," and then hung up the phone. "We've been friends 40 years. And the car dealer said, "I can't believe you keep voting against tort reform." Bam, he hung up the phone again. Well, about 9 o'clock the next morning, the car dealer gets a call. He says, "Legislator again." Legislator said, "I couldn't sleep last night. You know, I coached your kids in Little League, and you taught my kids in Sunday school, and I couldn't believe it. I couldn't sleep last night after you slammed the phone down in my face 2 different times." And the car dealer said, "You know what? I couldn't sleep last night either. I couldn't sleep worrying about some slimy trial lawyer coming in here and suing me and taking away from my children and grandchildren everything I worked for all my life." Bam, slam the phone down again. You won't be surprised to know the legislator voted for tort reform the next time that it came up. I mention that because it really was the local businessman, small businessman, contractor, doctor, hospital board member, insurance agent. These were the people that made tort reform happen. And they made it happen for the right reasons. They made it happen because it was right. I remember the events of the regular session pretty well. I wasn't kidding when I was talking about Neely. Charlie Ross, who you'll hear from later, who sponsored the bill in the Senate, with Amy Tuck, we passed tort reform through the Senate 3 different times during the regular session. The House was never allowed to vote on it. I remember very well, we have very strict deadlines in the legislature. One of the deadlines is the deadline to take up a bill that passed from the other house and has been sent to your house. That night, when the speaker wouldn't allow tort reform to come up, the vote to adjourn was 61 to 58. Came within 2 votes of failing to adjourn. There is a rule in legislative politics. What is the vote? What do you vote on after the motion to adjourn fails? Well, that's when you open nominations for a new speaker. It's a pretty serious thing, and I see a bunch of the 58 sitting around the room today who came that close because it was so important. The session ended. Marcia and I, it's my first term as governor, and as you know, I'd had a career in Washington as well as here, and some of the people that, when I had been chairman of the Republican National Committee, that were big allies of mine, had been named ambassadors. Remember, John Palmer from Mississippi was that year ambassador to Portugal. So before the session even started, Marcia and I had planned a trip to Europe. And we were going to stay at John Palmer's house in ambassador's residence in Portugal, and George Argerus's house in Spain, and Jim Nicholson's house in Rome, and Howard Leach's ambassadorial residence on the Champs-Élysées in Paris. Really looking forward to 17 days. And we had a meeting of senior staff, a couple of legislators. We're going to call a special session. Should we call it right now, call them right back in, or should we wait 2 months and do a lot more organizing at the grassroots, direct mail, blah, 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 blah? Before anybody could say their opinion, Marcia said, well, whatever y'all think's best, but if y'all don't, I'm not going to Europe till we pass tort reform. I'm not going to let people think that a vacation in Europe is more important to me than passing tort reform. So for that reason, primarily, on Sunday, the legislature adjourned. On Monday, I called them back into special session to start on Wednesday. Now, the legislators around the room, remember, a 125-day first session is tough anyway. But this was a very contentious session because I had come to office with an agenda. I mentioned that I never made a speech during the campaign where I didn't talk about tort reform. There were other things that we talk about. Some of you in this room attended our job creation summit, which we held between the election and my inauguration. We had about 700 people over at the Marriott, and we tried to Fred Smith came and spoke to the group, from the founder and CEO of FedEx, and we talked about what matters for creating jobs in Mississippi, because that's what I felt like I was elected for. After an all-day meeting, we came up with an agenda of 3 things: improve the quality of the workforce, no tax increases, tort reform. I had a very serious agenda. It had the modest name Haley's Plan. Was what we called our agenda, 7 things, and we pushed hard to get them done. We reformed economic development in the state and job training and other things, but at the end of the day, we hadn't gotten tort reform. Everybody's tired, ragged, worn out, and I called them back into session. And within 2 weeks, the speaker, who had kept tort reform off the floor, after the Senate had passed it 3 more times, by the way, 3 more times, the speaker allowed what he called a test vote. And we won the test vote by 20 votes, and then almost immediately passed the tort reform bill that became law, 78 to 39. Literally exactly 2 to 1. I was very proud of that. Still am. But I'll tell you, I'm a heck of a lot more proud of the results. Results that you're going to hear from this group, and you're going to like what you hear. Things like, when we were fighting the tort reform fight, the head site selector for Toyota wrote an article in Site Selection magazine in which he said, Toyota is not going anywhere that's got a reputation for lawsuit abuse. Well, I went up to New York and met with him. And I said, will you come down to Mississippi and say that? He said, sure, I will. First, he wrote a letter to the lieutenant governor, the speaker, and me. I mean, the speaker tried to get him fired. But he came down, met with us, made plain that he wasn't just talking through his hat. That was just a fact. The CEO of Caterpillar sent a letter to the speaker, lieutenant governor, and me. Happens Caterpillar has a plant in Boonville, Mississippi, a place the speaker's relatively fond of. And he said, you know, lawsuit abuse is not just an issue in where you locate a new plant. When you have to close existing plants, lawsuit abuse is a huge issue, he told the speaker, who had one of his plants in his hometown. The business community was super, super helpful in this, but it was you guys at the grassroots that made the difference. But at the end of the day, we not only ended the health care crisis in the state, we also got our state back on the map for some places, for some businesses that were looking for a new place. I will confess, Katrina did more to improve the image of Mississippi. Katrina and the actions of our people in the wake of the worst natural disaster in American history. Katrina did more to help our image than anything in my lifetime. People saw tough, strong, resilient, self-reliant people who got knocked down flat and got up the next day and hitched up their britches and went to work helping their neighbors as well as themselves. But these companies still wouldn't have come here if we had not solved the lawsuit abuse problem. And we did, and that's why we have Toyota. That's why we have added 2 General Electric aviation plants in Mississippi: PACCAR, Severstal, Airbus expansion, Caterpillar expansion. Winchester moved 1,300 jobs to Mississippi from Illinois. Wouldn't happen without tort reform. I want to thank you for that. But I also want you to know the second half of our program today is going to be about the threats to what we've done, because this fight's not over. There are lawsuits being filed in Mississippi today with the intention of trying to get the tort reform law thrown out. There's a case that's going to be heard in the coming weeks by the Mississippi Supreme Court, where a circuit judge in North Mississippi declared the legislatively passed, signed by the governor, limits or caps on non-economic damages unconstitutional. There's another case in Jasper County where a local judge found the caps on non-economic damages unconstitutional. That case wasn't appealed because the small oil company that got hit for $36 million couldn't afford to make an appeal bond, because you have to put up a bond or a fee of 125% of the amount of the judgment against you in order to appeal. That case can't be appealed. The good news is it's not stare decisis, it's not controlling on other courts. But in that case, the lawyer for the plaintiff cited the Coahoma County case. Again, not controlling precedent, but cited it as precedent. These guys are going to are trying to turn back what you have done. And we don't want to get back in that position. So as you go through the day, I hope you're going to get a kick out of what we've accomplished and pat yourself on the back. But before you go home, I hope you're going to rededicate yourself to making sure that the risks that are out there, that we overcome those challenges, that we make sure we don't go back to where we were 10 years ago, that we keep Mississippi open for business. Thank y'all.
How does tort reform affect the average person in Mississippi?
Well, let me put it this way. When I was running for governor, Montford Jones Hospital in Kosciuszko closed their obstetrics ward, their delivery room. They quit delivering babies because their malpractice premiums had gone up so much that they couldn't afford it. So that means if you were in that part of the state, instead of going to Kosciuszko for your daughter to have a baby, she had to go to Jackson or Greenwood or Starkville or Columbus. All of a sudden your daughter, your granddaughter, or your wife was 75 miles from where she could have a baby, and bad things can happen in 75 miles. Over in my area of the state, Sharkey-Issaquah County Hospital closed their emergency room because they couldn't pay the medical liability premium. So if your child got hurt on a four-wheeler accident or got hurt playing football or whatever, they had to go to Vicksburg, even to see a physician in the emergency room. Vicksburg, Yazoo City, or Greenville. That makes a difference in people's lives. When your doctor quits delivering babies, or even worse, your doctor quits practicing medicine at all, you understand that lawsuit abuse is hurting you.
What has to go forward now, in your opinion, over the next 10 years?
Well, we have to protect what we've done. There are lawyers who are bringing lawsuits, as I said earlier, claiming that tort reform is unconstitutional, that limits on non-economic damages or punitive damages are unconstitutional. We have to protect the law that was passed, and so we have to make sure we elect people in next year's legislative and state elections who are committed to this, that judges are committed to the laws that the legislature passes. And we also have to realize there are some things that weren't done. For instance, the appeal bond law, if a company has a judgment against them, they have to put up 125% of the judgment. So if you get a small company in a county like Jasper County, in 2012, a small oil drilling company, Eagle Oil, had a case and the jury found against them to the tune of $36 million. Of that $36 million, $26 million was absolutely contrary to the tort reform law. Absolutely. But they couldn't appeal because they couldn't raise the money to buy the bond, which was, as I say, 125%. So they had to raise a $45 million bond to have the right to appeal. So we want to make sure, and we have in the law that passed 10 years ago, there's nobody in Mississippi that loses their right to sue. Everybody has the right to go to court if they were hurt, to recover the damages and then some. But we've also got to make sure that we don't have an appeal bond law that is so expensive that when somebody violates the tort reform law, the defendant can't appeal. So that's one of the things we're talking about going forward too.
If people have questions like more information about this issue, what should they do?
Well, they can get in touch with the MEC, the Mississippi Economic Council, of course, the State Chamber of Commerce, the Mississippi Manufacturers Association, Mississippians for Economic Progress. I'm sure Governor Phil Bryant's office, Governor Bryant's a big supporter of tort reform and continues to be, that he can get you information. The Medical Association, all of these, National Federation of Independent Business, they realized that their members were all within one lawsuit of bankruptcy too. All of those organizations were involved, and I think one of the interesting things about this was done by the small businessman, by the local citizen who demanded of their legislature, you got to give us tort reform because you are threatening our town, our doctor, our hospital, our insurance agency, my car dealership, whatever. So you can get in touch with those organizations. They can give you more info.
Are you encouraged by what you've seen and heard here so far today?
I really am. A lot of these people worked on the tort reform thing. As I said, it was passed not because of television spots. It was passed because of activity by citizens in the county, in their hometowns, at the high school football game or basketball game, at church on Sunday, telling their legislators, this is important to our town. This is important to our state. And I'm glad to see that some of the people who were so involved in that when we did it 10 years ago.